Okay, so we know what an event is, we know what it looks like, we know we have to do some kind of track and identify call somewhere. The next big question is, where does an event go? I'm sure you've heard of product analytics tools, the ones I mentioned earlier, Mixpanel, Posthog, Amplitude, that kind of stuff. Most of the time, events go there, in those products. That is their bread and butter. They collect events, and then you analyze them. Many of those tools are built around the idea that those events never leave the analytics product, which is, fine, because that's what their purpose is. And in most cases, it's okay that the events stay there. But in order to do actionable PLG, you'll want to get those events out of that system. Sometimes you'll want to enrich your product analytics with other data, but separate topic. Point being, you want to select the system in a way so that you can both analyze the data on this small level within the analytics tool, or you can export it out, let's say to a data warehouse. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this series. Even some of the traditional event streaming tools, the Segments, the Rudderstacks of the world, they nowadays have a lot of capabilities for sending events directly into the data warehouse, but equally, a lot of them now are bringing out reverse ETL capabilities to actually read data out of your warehouse and send it forward. So let's talk about the most usual suspects of event tracking software. You got the product analytics tools where it's more or less a one-way stream, right? You want the events in and then you analyze them. Mixpanel, Posthog, Amplitude, those are meant to be tools you work out of. Then you have the more traditional CDPs, the customer data platforms. It took me a long while to understand what they are primarily meant to do, and I kind of boiled it down this way. They receive events and they fling them forward. So I call them event slingers. So the Segments, the Rudderstacks of the world. Even more commonplace, you have things like the Facebook tracking pixel, Twitter pixel, LinkedIn pixel. Those are all event tools. A pixel is nothing but a configuration for an event. It gets fired and it gets sent over to the ad platform. In this case, for example, it's Facebook. Facebook will never give those events back to you, of course, but the fundamental idea is the same. An event is captured and it's flung to the destination system. I gotta spill some tea here because I am very much not a fan of the likes of Google Analytics in the context of B2B SaaS, PLG, ABM, whatever. Products like Google Analytics were very much built for the e-commerce world, where you have high volumes and you don't really care who the actual user is that event is associated to. It makes total sense. If you have large data sets, you can infer behavior analysis from how those event paths go. But with B2B, we're typically working with low volumes, right? We don't have that many users. In most cases, people have 12 to 20,000 users in a platform if they're really successful. That's not a lot of volume to go with. So things like Google Analytics really don't fit in the scene because they are meant for anonymized event aggregation tracking. Hear me now, quote me later. If you plan to use GA for product-led growth,
you're gonna have a very bad time.
Okay, let's talk about rules of thumb for building events. You want to set up your events to be identity first. You always want to have an identify call somewhere in the process so that you actually know this random ID in this event belongs to a real user. Secondly, you want to design events as sort of like a building block, right? You don't overcomplicate the events, you don't necessarily make them too simple, but there are things that you can actually measure in terms of behavior. A page view is a good example. That's something a user does. I go on this page, I go on the dashboard, I go on the settings page. I log in, I log out, I sign up, I create a new workspace, I pay my goddamn bills. That's an event. Later on, you can use those events to combine them and build your more complex virtual events, the PQLs of the world. I don't know why I said those in quotes because that's exactly what we're going to be defining later in the series, but you get the point. You take building block events and you construct them into something meaningful. I personally like to call them activities. I don't know about you. If you can, try to avoid telemetry, things like logs, logging, and don't really send that to your user behavior platform because those tend to come in larger volumes, and because they don't really mean anything on a user level, they will pollute your product analytics setup, and it will make it really, really hard to understand what's going on. As a bonus topic, you should definitely Google what identity resolution is in the traditional CDP world. This whole track and identify calls, matching of anonymous IDs, is quite important, especially when it comes to events and users, especially when different sessions actually belong to the same user, that type of stuff. You should also start to think about how do you do similar identity resolution in your warehouse. Once you have access to that user and event data and you start matching it up with your go-to-market stuff, how do we do that? How do we say that this user in Mixpanel is this user in HubSpot? How do we know that this company in Salesforce is actually this workspace in our product, or is somehow related? That's going to be a big beef in the next coming weeks. Later. PLG, I choose you!